thank you for your applause. That's nice. I think we all know the way to a performer's heart is through his ego. And the way to a performer's ego is a well-marked path across the fields of despair, into the underbrush of self-loathing. You make your way into the forest of uncertainty, then you look for the weeping parents worshipping at the altar of unfulfilled potential. And then you just look for the great gaping maw of need whose infantile wailing can be briefly stilled by your applause or good scotch. And now let's continue to pretend I'm drinking coffee. The first story I would like to tell this evening is the story of the world's stupidest mugging, of which I was a victim some 24 years ago now. And I only realized backstage that, like a thing I talked about a minute ago, this also happened when I was going to hear a lecture at a university. And that made me feel guilty, because I do not want to be misleading you into thinking that I'm some academic intellectual who is forever going to lectures at you. I'm not that guy. I come from a family of academic intellectuals, but I didn't inherit the scholarship or the study skills. I mostly inherited a tendency to look rumpled all the time. But I went to hear my father speak at Columbia University in New York 24 years ago. He was delivering a lecture on the way in which entertainment captures the imagination and art sets it free. And this was a really nice lecture. My father, so you will understand, was the associate provost for the arts at MIT, which, by the way, is not pronounced arts at MIT. Just a perfect job for my father right there at the intersection of art and science. Some of you may have been aware of his Heisenberg Uncertainty opera, an epic musicale during which it's possible to accurately determine either the position or the momentum of the fat lady at any given time. Has a plot that cannot find its natural resolution if anyone is there to see it. Entire audiences left the theater going, but how is the cat? Is the cat okay? He got the job, actually, at MIT when a member of the search committee happened to be in England at the right time to catch his Cambridge University production of The Pirates of Penzance, starring Professor Stephen Hawking as the Pirate King. The singing wasn't great, but the choreography was innovative. I like people who laugh at that joke. Some people get very nervous. Professor Hawking himself has heard me do that joke, and he tells me I'm a very funny man. Although, in fairness, it's impossible to tell when he's being sarcastic. So I'd gone to Columbia to hear this lecture that my dad was giving, and it let out late in the evening. And I walked to a bus stop a few blocks off campus, which put me much farther north on the island of Manhattan than any middle-class white guy has any right to be, as it is nearing midnight. It was January. It was very cold. And I sat on the bench with my breath steaming in the night air, waiting for the bus to come. And a large African-American man came out of the building behind me. And, well, it was the mid-'80s, so still a big black guy. Came out of the building behind me and sat down next to me. And we sat together waiting for the bus with our breath steaming in the cold night air. And after a few minutes, he said, "Give me all your money." I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm mugging you. Give me all your money." And I said, "Well, do you have a knife or something?" And he said, "If you want, I could go in and get a knife." I did not want that. So I gave him the $6 that I had in my pocket. And then we sat together, waiting for the bus, with our breath steaming in the night air. Until I realized there was a problem, and I said, well, now I can't get on the bus. And he said, oh, sorry, and held out $1, which was at the time the cost of a bus ride in Manhattan. And I took the $1. And I said, thank you. To my mugger. And we sat together waiting for the bus with our breath steaming in the night air until the bus got there. And I got on, and I thought about saying to the bus driver, hey, this guy just mugged me. But now he'd taken $5. So it felt less like reporting a crime than telling on a guy. So I fed my $1 into the machine. I got on the bus, and he fed his $1 into the machine and got on the bus and sat a few rows behind me, and we headed off downtown together. And after a few blocks, he tapped me on the shoulder, and I said, what? And he held out $2 and said, why don't you take half of this money back? You really always ought to have some cash on you. That seemed sensible. So I took the $2 and I said thank you again to my mugger. And we rode on. And after a few more blocks, he rang the bell because he needed to get off the bus. And the bus driver was pulling over at the stop, and he tapped me on the shoulder again. And I said, what? And he held out the last $2, and he sort of sheepishly said, I really just needed bus fare. Why don't you take the rest of this back? And for the first time ever, it occurred to me that we live in a bizarre society where it's less humiliating to be a criminal than a little short on cash. But by now, I felt as though I had bonded with my mugger. So I pushed the $2 back into his hand. I said, why don't you hang on to that? You really always ought to have some cash on you. And he said, thank you. And got off the bus. And apparently the bus driver caught the tail end of this exchange because as we pulled away from the curb again, he looked back and he said, you know, you really shouldn't give them poor people money. It only encourages them. Thank you.